The blood-stained telegram shook in Grace Patterson's trembling hands as she stared at the words that had just shattered her world. Her husband, Thomas, was dead, killed in a mining accident near Silver Creek. At 23, Grace was now a widow in a town that had never truly felt like home. The year was 1873, and the Wyoming Territory offered little comfort to a woman alone. The small ranch house that had been their dream for just 8 months now felt like a prison of memories. Grace sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor, the telegram falling from her grasp as she finally allowed herself to weep. 3 days later, after burying Thomas in the small cemetery on the edge of town, Grace stood in her kitchen, staring at the papers spread before her. The bank would foreclose on their property within 30 days if she couldn't make the payment. Thomas had left behind more debts than savings, and the meager life insurance barely covered his funeral. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the empty room, her voice hollow. The walls that had once held their laughter now echoed with silence. A knock at the door startled her. Grace quickly wiped her eyes and smoothed her black mourning dress before answering. Sheriff Miller stood on her porch, hat in hand, his weathered face solemn. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm awful sorry to disturb you at a time like this." "It's all right, Sheriff. Please come in." Grace stepped aside, noticing the sheriff wasn't alone. Behind him stood a tall man with broad shoulders and a face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. "This here is August Blackwood," Sheriff Miller said, gesturing to the stranger. "He's looking for ranch work, and I remembered how your husband mentioned needing help before. Well, before the accident." August Blackwood stepped forward into the light of the doorway. His face was tanned and weathered by the sun, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught Grace's attention, intense blue eyes that seemed to see right through her pretense of composure. "Madam," he said simply, removing his hat. His dark hair was longer than most men wore it, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the sheriff bringing you by, but I'm afraid I can't hire anyone. In fact, I'll likely be selling the ranch soon." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. August glanced at the sheriff, then back to Grace. "I understand you're in a difficult position, Mrs. Patterson. I'm not looking for much pay, just a place to stay and honest work. I've got experience with cattle and horses, and I can repair most anything that needs fixing." Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "Grace, I know it's not my place, but Thomas would want you to at least consider it. August here comes highly recommended from the Dawsons spread over in Montana. He could help you keep things running until you decide what to do." Grace looked between the two men, weighing her limited options. The ranch needed work she couldn't do alone, and having a hired hand might make the property more attractive to buyers. "I can only offer room and board and perhaps a small share of whatever we can sell at market," she said finally. "And it would be temporary, just until I can settle things." August nodded. "That's fair. I appreciate the opportunity, Mrs. Patterson." After the sheriff left, Grace showed August to the small bunkhouse behind the main house. It was basic but clean, with a narrow bed, a wooden table, and a pot-bellied stove. "It's not much," she apologized. "It's more than enough," he replied, setting down his worn saddlebag. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count. This is luxury by comparison." "We'll start early tomorrow," Grace said, lingering in the doorway. "There's a lot that needs attention." August nodded. "I'll be ready at first light." As she walked back to the main house, Grace felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. She'd never been alone with a man who wasn't her husband or family. But necessity had forced her hand, and something about August Blackwood's steady gaze made her think the sheriff had done her a kindness by bringing him to her door. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn, as was her habit. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses and a worn apron, her morning attire set aside for practical reasons. When she stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, she was surprised to see August already at work, repairing a broken section of the corral fence. "You're up early," she called, walking toward him. He straightened, hammer in hand. "Daylight's precious. Figured I'd get started on the obvious problems." Grace surveyed his work. The repairs were skillful and sturdy. "You've done this before." "Yes, madam. My father was a carpenter before he took to ranching. Taught me everything he knew. Please call me Grace. Madam makes me feel like an old schoolmarm." A slight smile touched his lips. "Grace, then." They worked through the morning, taking stock of the ranch's condition. The small herd of cattle, just 25 head, looked healthy enough, but the barn needed repairs, and the chicken coop had been raided by a fox, leaving only 6 hens and a rooster. By midday, Grace was impressed with August's knowledge and work ethic. He tackled each task methodically, offering suggestions without presuming to take charge. As they shared a simple lunch of bread and dried beef on the porch, Grace found herself curious about this quiet man who had appeared when she needed help most. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Blackwood?" "August, please." He took a sip of water. "I was born in Missouri, but my family moved to Colorado when I was young. My father had gold fever like so many others." "Did he find his fortune?" August shook his head. "No, he found enough to keep hoping, but never enough to stop searching. When I was 16, he died in a cave-in. My mother and I moved to Montana after that, started a small ranch. She passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Grace said softly, "about both your parents. Thank you." August's eyes met hers briefly. "Sheriff Miller mentioned you lost your husband recently. I'm sorry for your loss as well." Grace looked away, surprised by the sudden tightness in her throat. "Thank you. We'd only been married 2 years. This ranch was our dream, but now—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice the fear and uncertainty that plagued her. "It's a good piece of land," August observed. "With the right management, it could be profitable. Perhaps for someone else. I don't see how I can keep it." August seemed to consider his words carefully. "What if you could? Would you want to stay?" The question caught Grace off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think beyond the immediate crisis. "I don't know. Thomas loved this place. I loved it because he did. Now I'm not sure what I want." August nodded, respecting her honesty. "Well, until you decide, I'm here to help keep things running." That evening, after August retired to the bunkhouse, Grace sat alone at the kitchen table, reviewing her finances again. The numbers hadn't changed. She was still $300 short of what she needed to keep the bank at bay. The cattle might fetch a decent price at market in a month, but by then it would be too late. A soft knock at the back door interrupted her calculations. August stood there, hat in hand. "Pardon the intrusion, but I noticed your roof has a leak above the north corner. Storm's coming tomorrow according to my knee, and that leak will only get worse. With your permission, I'd like to fix it first thing in the morning." "Of course. Thank you for noticing." Grace was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make some." August hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." As Grace prepared the coffee, August remained respectfully by the door, his tall frame making the kitchen seem smaller somehow. She gestured to a chair at the table. "Please sit. I don't stand on ceremony, especially these days." He sat, placing his hat on the table beside him. Grace noticed his hands strong and calloused from work, but surprisingly gentle as he accepted the coffee cup she offered. "I was just going over the accounts," she admitted, sitting across from him, "trying to make sense of my situation." August sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Is it very bad?" Grace sighed. "Bad enough. The bank needs $300 by the end of the month. Even if I sell everything I own, I won't have enough. What about the cattle? 25 head should bring more than that. Not for another month when they're ready for market. The bank won't wait. August was quiet for a moment. I may have a solution if you're willing to consider it. Grace looked up, curious. What kind of solution? I know a rancher near Cheyenne who's looking to expand his herd. He pays fair prices and might be willing to buy now, even if the cattle aren't quite market ready. Hope flickered in Grace's chest. Would you introduce me? I can do better than that. If you're agreeable, I could ride to his ranch tomorrow and speak to him directly. It's a day's ride each way, but I could be back with an answer by the day after tomorrow. Grace studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. All she saw was honest concern. Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. August met her gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do, and because I know what it's like to lose everything you care about. The simple sincerity in his words touched something deep within Grace. For the first time since receiving the telegram about Thomas, she felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, August. I would be grateful for your help. He nodded, finishing his coffee and standing to leave. I'll ride out at first light. The roof can wait until I return. As promised, August left before dawn the next morning. Grace watched from the window as he rode away, his tall figure silhouetted against the lightening sky. She spent the day tending to the animals and working in the small vegetable garden, trying not to think about what would happen if August's plan failed. The storm he'd predicted arrived in the afternoon, bringing heavy rain that found every weakness in the roof. Grace placed buckets under the worst leaks and tried to ignore the symbolic nature of her failing shelter. Like her life, the ranch was coming apart at the seams. That night, alone in the house with the rain drumming overhead, Grace allowed herself to think about August Blackwood. There was something compelling about him, not just his quiet strength or his kindness, but the sense that he understood loss in a way few others did. For the first time since Thomas's death, she'd met someone who didn't treat her with pitying glances or awkward platitudes. The next day passed slowly, with Grace anxiously watching the road for any sign of August's return. By evening, with no sight of him, she began to wonder if he'd simply moved on, leaving her to face her problems alone. It wouldn't be the first time someone had made promises they couldn't keep. Just as darkness fell, however, the sound of hoofbeats announced his arrival. Grace hurried to the porch, a lantern in hand, relief washing over her as August dismounted, looking tired but satisfied. Mr. Carruthers will buy 20 head for $350, he announced without preamble. He'll send men to collect them the day after tomorrow. Grace stared at him in disbelief. 350, that's more than I hoped for. August nodded, leading his horse toward the barn. He's a fair man. I told him your situation and he agreed to pay market price, even though they're not quite ready. Grace followed him, the lantern casting long shadows. I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks. It's a good business arrangement for both parties. August removed his saddle, his movements efficient despite his obvious fatigue. You'll keep the ranch and 5 head of cattle to start rebuilding your herd. Thanks to you, Grace said softly. August paused, turning to face her. In the lantern light, his expression was unreadable. You're doing the hard part, Grace. Staying and fighting for what's yours takes more courage than riding to make a deal. His words warmed her more than they should have. Are you hungry? I've kept supper warm. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Starving, actually. Over a simple meal of stew and cornbread, August told Grace about his journey and the ranch owner, Harold Carruthers. He's expanding his operation, looking to sell beef to the railroad crews. He was genuinely pleased with the arrangement. I still can't believe you managed to negotiate such a good price. August shrugged. The cattle are healthy and well-bred. They're worth it. He glanced around the kitchen. This is a good spread, Grace. With some work and a bit of luck, you could make it profitable within a year. Grace hesitated, stirring her stew thoughtfully. I haven't decided if I'm staying yet. Even with the debt paid, running a ranch alone isn't easy. No, it isn't, August agreed. But you wouldn't have to do it alone. There are hands looking for work, honest men who'd be glad for a steady job. Like you, the question slipped out before Grace could stop it. August's blue eyes met hers. If you'd want me to stay on, I would, but only if that's what you want. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Grace looked away first, suddenly aware of how inappropriate it might seem a young widow asking a single man to remain on her property. Let's see how things stand after Mr. Carruthers collects the cattle, she said finally. I appreciate your offer, though. August nodded, respecting her caution. Of course. True to his word, Harold Carruthers sent 3 men 2 days later to collect the 20 head of cattle. They brought with them a bank draft for $350, which Grace immediately took to town to deposit. The bank manager, who had been preparing to foreclose on her property, was visibly disappointed when she paid the outstanding debt in full. Mrs. Patterson, while I'm pleased you've met your obligation, I must advise you that running a ranch is difficult business for a woman alone, he said, his tone condescending. If you should reconsider selling, my offer still stands. Grace straightened her spine. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hargrove, but I've decided to keep the ranch for now. Good day. As she left the bank, Grace felt a strange lightness in her step. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had made a decision based on what she wanted, not what circumstances forced upon her. The ranch was hers, at least for now, and she intended to make it work. August was repairing the leaky roof when she returned, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he worked in the warm afternoon sun. Grace watched him for a moment, appreciating his methodical approach and obvious skill. The bank accepted the draft, she called up to him. The debt is paid. August smiled down at her, genuine pleasure in his expression. That's good news. Congratulations, Grace. I couldn't have done it without your help. He shrugged, hammering another shingle into place. You'd have found a way. You're resourceful. Grace laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had laughed? I'm stubborn, you mean? That too, August agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. But it's a good quality in a rancher. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and purple, Grace made her decision. I'd like you to stay on, August. At least through the summer. I can't pay much yet, but I can offer a fair percentage of whatever we earn at market. August was quiet for a moment, his profile strong against the fading light. Are you certain? People will talk, Grace sighed. People always talk. I'm a widow trying to run a ranch. They'll talk no matter what I do. True enough. August nodded slowly. In that case, I accept your offer. We should consider buying more cattle soon, though. 5 head isn't enough to build a proper herd. We can't afford more yet. There's a way around that. Harold Carruthers mentioned he might be interested in a partnership of sorts. He has more cattle than grazing land, and your ranch has good grass. He could place some of his cattle here, and you'd get a percentage of the calves born next spring. Grace considered the idea. That could work. Would he agree to such an arrangement? I believe so. He seemed impressed by what I told him about your determination to keep the ranch going. Grace smiled, touched by August's confidence in her. What did you tell him? August turned to look at her, his expression serious. The truth, that you're facing impossible odds with courage and grace. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air, a new awareness that neither acknowledged aloud. Grace looked away first, her cheeks warming. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. "Someone should," August replied simply. The following weeks established a comfortable routine. August worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, strengthening the barn, and tending to the remaining cattle. Grace managed the household and garden, occasionally riding into town for supplies. Together, they discussed plans for the ranch's future, debating the merits of different approaches. Harold Carruthers agreed to their partnership proposal, delivering 30 head of cattle to graze on Grace's land in exchange for 1/3 of the calves born the following spring. It was a fair arrangement that benefited both parties and gave Grace hope that her ranch might survive after all. As May turned to June, the Wyoming landscape exploded with wildflowers, painting the hills surrounding the ranch in vibrant colors. Grace found herself noticing beauty again, the way morning light played across the meadow, the graceful flight of hawks circling overhead, the satisfied exhaustion that came with meaningful work. She also found herself noticing August more and more. The way his hands moved with confidence, whether mending tack or building a new chicken coop. The deep timbre of his voice when he spoke to the horses. The rare but transformative smile that softened his serious features. These thoughts brought guilt in their wake. Thomas had been dead just over 3 months. Was it disloyal to notice another man so soon? Grace tried to focus on the practical aspects of their relationship. August was her employee, nothing more. But in quiet moments, when their eyes met over the dinner table or their hands brushed while working side by side, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. For his part, August maintained a respectful distance, never overstepping the boundaries of their arrangement. But Grace sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster, a look of admiration, and something deeper that he quickly concealed when she noticed. One evening in late June, a traveling peddler stopped at the ranch, his wagon filled with household goods, fabrics, and small luxuries rarely seen in remote areas. While August helped the man water his horses, Grace browsed his wares, eventually purchasing some needles, thread, and a small bottle of lavender water, a frivolous expense she justified as a reward for her hard work. As the peddler prepared to leave, he gave Grace a curious look. "Begging your pardon, madam, but are you and your husband looking to sell this place? I heard in town that the Patterson ranch might be available." Grace stiffened. "You heard wrong. This ranch isn't for sale, and Mr. Blackwood is my employee, not my husband." The peddler's eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, no offense intended, madam, just repeating what I heard." After he left, Grace paced the kitchen, anger simmering beneath her skin. The nerve of that man, and the people in town still gossiping about my business. August leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Does it bother you that he mistook me for your husband?" The question stopped Grace mid-stride. "No," she admitted. "What bothers me is that people assume I can't manage without a husband, that I must be selling, or that you must be more than an employee for me to keep the ranch." August nodded, understanding. People fear what they don't understand. A woman running her own ranch challenges their notions of how things should be. "Well, they'll have to get used to it," Grace declared, "because I'm not going anywhere." A small smile touched August's lips. "Good." The following Sunday, Grace decided to attend church in town for the first time since Thomas's funeral. She dressed carefully in her best dress, no longer full mourning black, but a subdued navy blue that acknowledged her status as a widow while suggesting she was moving forward. August offered to drive her in the wagon, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. As they approached town, Grace felt a flutter of anxiety. "Perhaps this is a mistake," she murmured. I'm not sure I'm ready to face everyone. August's steady gaze met hers. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Grace. We can turn around if you want. His use of we rather than you didn't escape her notice. It was a small thing, but it reinforced that she wasn't alone. No, she decided. I need to do this. The service itself was unremarkable, but the reactions of the townspeople were exactly as Grace had feared. Women whispered behind their fans, and men cast speculative glances at August. Grace held her head high, greeting acquaintances with polite smiles while ignoring the obvious curiosity about her companion. After the service, several women approached, offering belated condolences mixed with thinly veiled questions about her situation. "My dear, how are you managing all alone?" asked Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife. "Such a burden for a young woman." "I'm doing well, thank you," Grace replied. "The ranch is coming along nicely." "I heard you've hired help, Mrs. Walters chimed in, her gaze sliding to August, who stood a respectful distance away, talking with Sheriff Miller. "A single man living on your property. People are talking, my dear." Grace straightened her spine. "Mr. Blackwood is an excellent ranch hand recommended by Sheriff Miller himself. I'm fortunate to have his assistance. Still, propriety must be considered," Mrs. Henderson insisted. "A young widow alone with a man not related to her, it invites gossip." "I appreciate your concern," Grace said, her tone cooling, "but I value my ranch's success more than idle gossip. Now, if you'll excuse me." As she walked away, Grace heard Mrs. Walters mutter, "So forward, Thomas would be shocked." The comment stung more than Grace wanted to admit. Would Thomas be disappointed in her choices? She had loved him deeply, and his death had shattered her world. But she was still alive, still breathing, still fighting to keep their dream alive. August noticed her distress as they drove home. "Difficult conversations," Grace sighed. "The town matrons believe I'm compromising my reputation by having you work for me." August's jaw tightened. "I can find somewhere else to stay if it would make things easier for you." "No," Grace said firmly. "That would only give them more to gossip about. Besides, I need your help with the ranch." August nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Your reputation matters, Grace. I don't want to be the cause of any difficulties for you." "My reputation will survive," she replied. "And frankly, I care less about what people think than I did before Thomas died. Life is too unpredictable to worry about satisfying everyone else's expectations." August studied her face for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You've changed since I first met you." "Have I? You're stronger, more certain of yourself." Grace considered his words. "Perhaps I am. Necessity is a harsh teacher, but an effective one." August's voice was soft, almost tender. "You're remarkable, Grace Patterson." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. July brought scorching heat, and the challenges of keeping cattle watered in the dry conditions. August spent long days checking water sources and moving the herd to fresher grazing areas. Grace worried when he returned after dark, exhausted and sunburned, but he waved off her concerns. "This is normal ranch work," he assured her. "It'll ease up once the weather breaks." One particularly hot afternoon, Grace decided to ride out to bring August some fresh water and food. She found him by the creek that marked the northern boundary of her property, shirtless as he worked to clear a blockage that was restricting the water flow. She reined in her horse, suddenly embarrassed at catching him in such a state of undress. But before she could retreat, August looked up and saw her. He quickly grabbed his shirt from a nearby bush and pulled it on, though he left it unbuttoned as he waded out of the creek. "Grace," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "is everything all right?" Yes, I just thought you might need some water and food. She held up the canteen and small bundle she'd brought. It's so hot today. August approached, water still dripping from his hair and beard. Up close, Grace couldn't help noticing the broad expanse of his chest, tanned and muscled from hard work, visible through his open shirt. She quickly averted her eyes, feeling heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. "That's thoughtful of you," August said, accepting the canteen gratefully. He drank deeply, then poured some water over his head, sighing with relief as it cooled his skin. Grace dismounted, needing something to do with herself. "How is the creek? Will it last through the summer?" "It should, now that I've cleared that beaver dam. The water's flowing better." August buttoned his shirt, seemingly aware of her discomfort. "The cattle will be fine." Grace nodded, focusing on unpacking the food she'd brought: bread, cheese, and some dried apple slices. They sat in the shade of a large cottonwood tree, the sound of the creek creating a peaceful backdrop to their impromptu meal. "I've been thinking," August said after a while. "The south pasture would be good for hay if we cleared it and planted this fall. We could cut our feed costs for winter." Grace smiled at his use of "we" and "our." August had fully invested himself in the ranch's success, thinking beyond the immediate season to long-term improvements. "That's a good idea," she agreed. "Do you think we could manage it ourselves, or would we need to hire help?" "We could do most of it, but an extra hand or two for the planting would make it go faster." August stretched his long legs out before him. "There's a Cheyenne family camped about 5 miles west who might be willing to work for fair wages. The father and son are good workers. I've crossed paths with them before." Grace considered this. Would they be comfortable working for a woman? Iron Hawk respects hard work and fair dealing, regardless of whether it comes from a man or woman. "But I can speak with him first if you'd prefer." "I'd like to go with you," Grace decided. "It's my ranch after all. I should be the one to offer the work." August's expression showed approval and something else, a warmth that made Grace's heart beat faster. "You continue to surprise me, Grace Patterson." 2 days later, they rode together to the Cheyenne camp. Grace was nervous, having had little interaction with Native Americans beyond occasional trading in town. August assured her that Iron Hawk and his family were peaceful and had adapted to living alongside white settlers, though they maintained many of their traditions. The camp was small but well organized, with several teepees arranged in a semicircle. Children played nearby, stopping to stare curiously as Grace and August approached. A tall, dignified man with graying hair stepped forward to meet them. August dismounted and greeted the man in a mixture of English and Cheyenne words. Grace followed his lead, standing slightly behind him as introductions were made. "Iron Hawk, this is Grace Patterson. She owns the ranch where I work. Grace, this is Iron Hawk and his wife, Morning Dove." Iron Hawk studied Grace with dark, intelligent eyes. "You are young to own land," he observed. "My husband died," Grace explained. "The ranch was ours together. Now it's mine alone." Iron Hawk nodded slowly. "Many of our people have died as well. We understand loss." Morning Dove, a handsome woman with a kind face, stepped forward. "Please sit. Share our fire." The next hour was a revelation for Grace. Despite the language barrier, with August translating when necessary, she found herself enjoying the company of Iron Hawk's family. They shared a meal of stew and talked about the changing landscape, the challenges of survival, and their hopes for peace between their peoples. When Grace explained her need for workers to help clear and plant the south pasture, Iron Hawk conferred briefly with his eldest son, a serious young man named Swift Deer. "We will help," Iron Hawk decided, "for fair payment and some of the harvest for our winter stores." "Agreed," Grace said. offering her hand in the white man's way of sealing a bargain. Iron Hawk looked momentarily surprised, then shook her hand with a firm grip. "You have courage, woman who owns land. This is good." As they rode back to the ranch, Grace felt a new sense of connection to the land around her. "Thank you for introducing me to Iron Hawk and his family," she said to August. "I'm glad they'll be working with us." "They're good people," August replied. Treated unfairly by most whites, but still willing to find common ground, Grace glanced at him. "You speak their language well." August nodded. "I spent some time with the Cheyenne years ago after my mother died. I was lost, I suppose. They taught me many things about living in harmony with the land and finding peace within oneself." "Is that why you understand loss so well?" Grace asked softly. August was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps. Or maybe it's just that once you've experienced certain kinds of pain, you recognize it in others." The simple honesty of his answer touched Grace deeply. Without thinking, she reached across the space between their horses and placed her hand on his arm. "I'm glad you came to my door that day, August Blackwood." His blue eyes met hers, intense and unguarded. "So am I, Grace, so am I." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then August gently covered her hand with his own, a brief touch that sent warmth spreading through her body, before they both returned their attention to the trail ahead. With Iron Hawk and Swift Deer's help, the work on the south pasture progressed quickly. By early August, the land was cleared and prepared for planting. The days were filled with physical labor, but Grace found satisfaction in watching the ranch transform under their collective efforts. August had become indispensable, not just for his work but for his companionship. Their evenings often found them sitting on the porch, discussing the day's accomplishments and planning for the future. Grace realized she had begun to think of the ranch as their joint endeavor, though she reminded herself that August was still her employee, free to leave whenever he chose. This thought troubled her more than it should have. The idea of August leaving created a hollow feeling in her chest that she tried to ignore. He had never promised to stay permanently, after all. But as the weeks passed, he showed no signs of wanting to move on, investing himself in long-term projects that suggested he saw a future at the ranch. One evening in mid-August, a violent thunderstorm swept across the valley. Grace and August had just finished dinner when the first crash of thunder shook the house. Rain began to pound against the windows, driven by fierce winds that howled around the eaves. "I should check on the horses," August said, rising from the table. Grace followed him to the door, concerned. "Be careful, that lightning is striking awfully close." August grabbed his slicker and hat. "I won't be long." The moment he stepped outside, the storm intensified. Grace watched anxiously from the window as August made his way to the barn, leaning into the wind. She busied herself cleaning up from dinner, trying not to worry about the worsening conditions. When nearly an hour had passed with no sign of August's return, Grace's concern grew. The storm was directly overhead now, with lightning striking repeatedly on the nearby hills. Unable to wait any longer, she donned her own rain gear and ventured out into the tempest. The short distance to the barn seemed endless as rain lashed her face and wind threatened to knock her off her feet. When she finally reached the barn door, she was soaked despite her slicker. Inside, the horses were restless, whinnying nervously with each thunder crash. "August," she called, peering into the dim interior. "Up here," came his voice from the hayloft. "Stay where you are. There's a leak in the roof and I'm trying to cover it before the hay gets soaked." Grace could just make out his form moving above her. "Can I help?" "No need. I've almost—" His words were cut off by a tremendous crash of thunder, followed immediately by the sound of splintering wood. A section of the roof had given way, sending August tumbling from the loft along with a cascade of hay and broken timber. "August!" Grace screamed, rushing toward where he had fallen. He lay motionless on the barn floor, partially covered by debris. Heart pounding, she knelt beside him, frantically pushing away the broken boards to reach him. "August, can you hear me?" For a terrifying moment there was no response. Then August groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Grace!" Relief flooded through her. "Don't move. You might be hurt." August grimaced, attempting to sit up despite her warning. "I'm all right. Just had the wind knocked out of me." Grace helped him into a sitting position, her hands moving gently over his arms and shoulders, searching for injuries. "Are you sure nothing's broken?" "Reasonably sure," he said, wincing as he moved his right arm. "Though I may have bruised my shoulder." Another flash of lightning illuminated the barn, showing Grace the extent of the damage. A section of the roof about 6 feet square had collapsed, allowing rain to pour in. August had been lucky that the fall hadn't been worse. "We need to get you back to the house," Grace insisted. "Can you walk?" August nodded, allowing her to help him to his feet. He swayed slightly, placing his good arm around her shoulders for support. The contact sent a jolt through Grace's body, but she focused on guiding him toward the door. The journey back to the house was slow and difficult, with rain still pelting down and the ground turned to mud beneath their feet. By the time they reached the porch, they were both exhausted and drenched. Inside, Grace helped August to a chair by the fireplace, then hurried to stoke the fire and bring towels. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," she said practically, though her cheeks warmed at the implication. "I'll fetch something dry from the bunkhouse for you." August caught her hand as she turned to go. "Wait, the storm's still too dangerous. I'll manage with a blanket for now." Grace hesitated, aware of the impropriety of the situation but more concerned with August's well-being. "At least let me help you with your boots and jacket. You're shivering." August submitted to her assistance, wincing as she helped him remove his sodden jacket. His shirt beneath was also soaked, clinging to his broad shoulders and chest. Grace averted her eyes, focusing on practical matters as she wrapped a thick quilt around him. "I should look at your shoulder," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can you move it at all?" August cautiously rotated his shoulder, his face tightening with pain. "It's not dislocated, but it's definitely bruised." Grace brought a basin of warm water and clean cloths. "I need to see it properly, if you could." She gestured awkwardly at his wet shirt, understanding dawned in August's eyes. "Of course." With some difficulty, he unbuttoned his shirt and slipped it off his injured shoulder, keeping the quilt draped over the rest of him. Grace tried to maintain a clinical detachment as she examined his shoulder, which was already showing signs of bruising. The warmth of his skin beneath her fingers and the play of firelight across his muscled torso made it difficult to concentrate. "I don't think anything's broken," she said, her voice slightly breathless, "but you'll need to rest it for a few days." August's eyes never left her face as she worked. "You're good at this," he observed quietly. "I've had some practice. Ranch life comes with its share of injuries." Grace wrung out a cloth in the warm water and gently cleaned a small cut on his upper arm, trying to ignore the intimacy of the moment. Outside, the storm continued to rage, creating a cocoon of isolation around the small house. Inside, by the fire's light, Grace became acutely aware of August's proximity, the sound of his breathing, the clean masculine scent of him beneath the smell of rain and hay. "Thank you, Grace," August said softly as she finished tending to his injuries. "Not just for this, but for everything." Grace looked up, meeting his intense blue gaze. "What do you mean? For giving me a place here, for trusting me, for making me feel—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Welcome." The simple statement contained depths of meaning that Grace could sense but not fully comprehend. What had August's life been like before he came to her ranch? How long had it been since he'd felt truly welcome somewhere? "You've done far more for me than I have for you," she replied. "I don't know how I would have managed these past months without your help." August reached out with his good hand, gently tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. The casual intimacy of the gesture made Grace's heart skip a beat. "You would have found a way," he said, his voice low and certain. "You're stronger than you know, Grace Patterson." Their eyes held, and Grace felt something shift between them, a boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged. August's hand lingered near her face, and for a wild moment, Grace thought he might lean forward and kiss her. Part of her wanted him to, a realization that both frightened and exhilarated her. Instead, August slowly withdrew his hand, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "I should try to get back to the bunkhouse once the storm eases," he said, though there was reluctance in his tone. Grace knew it was the proper thing to do, but she found herself unwilling to let him go just yet. "The storm might last all night. You should stay here at least until it passes. You can take Thomas's." She stopped, surprised by how naturally the offer had come. "You can take the spare room." August studied her face, seeming to understand the significance of what she was offering. "Are you certain?" Grace nodded. "Yes. It's the sensible thing to do with your injury and the weather." It was more than sensibility that guided her decision, though Grace wasn't ready to examine her feelings too closely. All she knew was that the thought of August returning to the cold, possibly leaking bunkhouse troubled her, especially when there was a perfectly good bed in the house. "Then I accept," August said simply. "Thank you." That night, lying in her bed listening to the storm gradually subsiding and aware of August's presence in the next room, Grace confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with August Blackwood. The realization should have brought guilt or confusion, but instead, Grace felt a strange peace settle over her. Thomas would always hold a special place in her heart, but he was gone, and she was still living. Perhaps learning to love again was part of learning to breathe again. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, the air washed clean by the night's rain. Grace rose early, as was her habit, and found August already in the kitchen, attempting to start breakfast one-handed. "You should be resting that shoulder," she scolded gently, taking the coffee pot from him. August smiled, the morning light highlighting the angles of his face. "I'm not much good at sitting idle." "Well, you'll have to learn. That barn roof needs fixing, and you won't be climbing up there with an injured shoulder." Grace busied herself with breakfast preparations, acutely aware of August watching her movements. "I can direct the work, at least. Iron Hawk and Swift Deer will help if we ask them." Grace nodded, appreciating his continued use of "we" and his assumption that he would remain involved in the ranch's operations. "That's a good idea. We should ride out to their camp later today." August leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "Grace, about last night." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes. I want you to know that I respect your position and I would never presume." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "What I mean to say is, I understand the boundaries between us, and I won't overstep them." Grace felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. August was being honorable, acknowledging the potential impropriety of their situation while assuring her of his respect. It was what any decent man would do. Yet part of her had hoped for something more, an acknowledgement of the connection growing between them. "I appreciate that, August," she said carefully. "But I think we've moved beyond a simple employer-employee relationship, don't you? We're partners in this ranch now, at the very least." August's eyes searched hers. "Partners," he repeated, testing the word. "Yes, I suppose we are. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sheriff Miller stood on the porch, his expression grave. "Morning, Grace." "August." He nodded to each of them. "Hope I'm not interrupting breakfast." "Not at all, Sheriff. Please come in." Grace ushered him inside, concerned by his serious demeanor. "Is something wrong?" Miller removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture Grace had come to recognize as a prelude to difficult news. "I'm afraid so. There's been trouble with cattle rustlers about 30 miles north of here. The Simmons Ranch was hit hard, lost nearly half their herd." August straightened, instantly alert. "When did this happen?" "Night before last, during that big storm." Rustlers often take advantage of bad weather, makes it harder to hear them coming or track them after. Miller accepted the coffee Grace offered. "I'm riding around to warn all the ranchers in the area. These men are dangerous, killed one of Simmons's hands who tried to stop them." Grace exchanged a worried glance with August. "Our herd is small, but Carruthers has 30 head grazing on our land. Would that be enough to attract rustlers?" "Could be," Miller admitted. "They seem to be targeting smaller spreads, figuring they'll have less protection." He looked pointedly at August's injured shoulder. "You folks might want to consider hiring some extra hands for a while, just as a precaution." August nodded. "We were already planning to bring in Iron Hawk and his son to help repair storm damage. We'll ask them to stay on." "Good idea," Miller approved. "Iron Hawk's a steady man. He and his boy will be a help if trouble comes." He finished his coffee and stood to leave. "I need to keep riding. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of the situation." After the sheriff left, Grace and August discussed their options. The ranch was vulnerable, with just the two of them and August injured. They decided to ride to Iron Hawk's camp immediately, rather than waiting until later in the day as they'd planned. The Cheyenne family agreed readily to their proposal. Iron Hawk seemed concerned about the news of rustlers and offered to move his entire camp closer to the ranch for added security. By nightfall, 3 tippies had been erected in the meadow behind the main house, and swift deer had taken up a position watching the herd. August insisted on taking a watch as well, despite his injured shoulder. Grace argued against it, but he was adamant. "I won't be climbing any roofs, but I can still sit a horse and fire a gun if needed," he assured her. "Iron Hawk and I will take turns keeping watch." Grace knew it was sensible, but she disliked the idea of August pushing himself while injured. "At least promise me you'll be careful. Don't try to be heroic if you spot trouble. Come back to the house and we'll form a plan together." August's expression softened at her concern. "I promise." No heroics. The next few days passed without incident. Iron Hawk and Swift Deer helped repair the barn roof while August supervised, and Morning Dove proved to be a skilled gardener, helping Grace harvest and preserve late summer vegetables. Their presence brought a new energy to the ranch, filling it with activity and the sounds of life. Grace found herself enjoying Morning Dove's company particularly. Though they had no language in common beyond a few words and gestures, the older woman was patient and kind, showing Grace traditional methods of preserving food and medicinal uses for common plants. One afternoon, as they worked together hanging herbs to dry, Morning Dove made a comment in Cheyenne, then smiled and pointed between Grace and August, who was visible through the window, working with Swift Deer. "Strong man," Morning Dove said in halting English. "Good heart." She patted her chest, then pointed to Grace. "You see him?" "Good." Grace blushed, understanding the woman's meaning. "He is a good man," she agreed cautiously. Morning Dove nodded sagely. "Life short, love important." The simple wisdom struck Grace deeply. Life was indeed short. Thomas's sudden death had taught her that lesson all too well. Was she wasting precious time by denying her feelings for August? That evening, After a shared meal around the outdoor fire Iron Hawk had built, Grace found herself alone with August on the porch. The air was cooling with the approach of autumn, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Sheriff Miller rode by while you were helping Morning Dove this afternoon," August said. "The rustlers hit another ranch yesterday, the Wilson place, about 20 miles east." Grace frowned. "They're moving in this direction." August nodded. "Seems that way. Miller's organizing a group of ranchers to patrol the area. I told him I'd join them once my shoulders healed." "Is that wise? Going after dangerous men, it's necessary," August replied. "These rustlers won't stop until they're caught. Every rancher in the territory has a stake in this." Grace understood his reasoning, but the thought of August riding out to confront armed criminals filled her with dread. "When would you go?" "Not for another week at least. My shoulder needs more time." August glanced at her, his expression softening. "Don't worry, Grace, I don't take unnecessary risks." "Don't I?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. August turned to face her fully. "What do you mean?" Grace took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Morning Dove said something to me today. She said life is short and love is important. It made me think about Thomas, about how suddenly he was taken from me." August remained silent, watching her with those intense blue eyes that seemed to see into her soul. "I've been afraid," Grace continued. "Afraid of feeling anything for anyone, because loss hurts so much. But I'm more afraid of not living fully while I have the chance." She met his gaze directly. "I care for you, August. More than I should, perhaps, as your employer, but I can't pretend otherwise any longer." For a moment, August didn't move, and Grace feared she had misread everything between them. Then slowly he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Grace," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've cared for you since the day I met you. But I never wanted to presume or to rush you. You were grieving, and I respected that." "I still grieve for Thomas," Grace admitted. "I think a part of me always will. But my heart has room for new feelings too. I just didn't expect to find them so soon." August's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, sending warmth up her arm. "I never expected to find you," he said simply. "I was just passing through, looking for temporary work. Then the sheriff brought me to your door and something changed." "For me too," Grace whispered. August raised his free hand to her face, his touch feather light against her cheek. "May I kiss you, Grace Patterson?" her heart racing. Grace nodded. August leaned forward, closing the distance between them with deliberate slowness, giving her every chance to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was gentle, questioning, almost reverential. Grace responded with a depth of feeling that surprised her, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. August drew her closer, his arms encircling her waist as though she were something precious he feared might break. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, August rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he confessed. Grace smiled, a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in months. "So have I, though I wouldn't admit it to myself." August brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression growing serious. "I want you to know that my feelings for you are sincere, Grace." "This isn't just—" Grace placed her fingers gently over his lips. "I know. I trust you, August. I wouldn't have spoken if I didn't." They remained on the porch for a long time, talking quietly, sharing occasional kisses and watching the stars emerge. For the first time since Thomas's death, Grace felt truly alive again, as though she had been holding her breath for months and could finally fill her lungs completely. The following days brought a new sweetness to ranch life, even as they remained vigilant against the threat of rustlers. August and Grace were careful to maintain propriety when others were present, but their quiet moments together were filled with growing affection and deepening understanding. Iron Hawk, with his keen perception, seemed to notice the change between them. One evening, as August helped him check the horses, the older man commented, "The woman who owns land has a lighter spirit now. This is good." August smiled. "She's strong, stronger than she knows." Iron Hawk nodded. "Strong women make the best partners. They stand beside you in trouble, not behind you." "That's certainly true of Grace," August agreed. The Cheyenne man studied him thoughtfully. "You will stay with her, if she'll have me," August replied honestly. "I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about her." Iron Hawk seemed satisfied with this answer. "Good. She needs someone who sees her strength, not just her beauty." A week passed without any sign of the rustlers, though news came of other ranches being hit further east. Sheriff Miller's patrol groups seemed to be pushing the thieves away from their immediate area, giving everyone a cautious sense of security. August's shoulder had improved enough that he could resume most of his regular duties, though Grace still insisted he avoid the heaviest work. One afternoon, as they rode together to check on the cattle in the north pasture, August brought up a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, guiding his horse alongside hers. "About my place here on the ranch." Grace glanced at him, a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Was he planning to leave? "What about it?" August took a deep breath. "I want to be more than your employee, Grace, more than your partner in running the ranch even." He reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "I want to court you properly, if you'll allow it, with the intention of making a life together." Relief and joy washed over Grace. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. August's serious expression gave way to a smile that transformed his face. "You would?" "Yes," Grace laughed, suddenly light-hearted. "Did you think I would say no?" "I hoped not, but—" August ran a hand through his hair. "You're a young widow with a promising future. You could have your pick of suitors once you're ready to enter society again." "I don't want a suitor from society," Grace said firmly. "I want you, August Blackwood, with your calloused hands and quiet strength and the way you look at me as though I'm something precious." August reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand. "You are precious to me, Grace. More than I can say." They might have remained there longer, lost in each other's eyes, if not for the distant sound of a gunshot. Both instantly alert, they turned toward the noise which had come from the direction of the main house. "Stay here," August ordered, already turning his horse. "No," Grace countered, spurring her mount forward. "I'm coming with you." They rode hard toward the ranch, fear gripping Grace's heart. Iron Hawk and Swift Deer had been working near the barn, while Mourning Dove had been with the younger children by the tippies. Any of them could be in danger. As they crested the small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings, Grace saw 3 men on horseback by the corral, attempting to drive a portion of the cattle through the open gate. Iron Hawk and Swift Deer were taking cover behind the barn, exchanging gunfire with the rustlers. "The South Creek bed," August said urgently. "We can approach from behind them using the trees for cover." Grace nodded, following August's lead as they guided their horses down the back slope and into the shallow creek that ran along the southern edge of the property. The water muffled their horses' hoofbeats as they moved swiftly through the dappled shade of cottonwood trees. When they were about 100 yards from the rustlers, August signaled for Grace to stop. "Stay here, under cover," he whispered. "I'm going to circle around and come up behind them." "Be careful," Grace pleaded, fear making her voice shake. August squeezed her hand briefly. "I promised you no heroics, remember? Just trying to even the odds for Iron Hawk." Grace watched anxiously as August dismounted and moved silently through the trees, his rifle ready. She had her own pistol, a small .32 caliber that Thomas had insisted she learn to use, but she prayed she wouldn't need it. From her position, Grace could see that the rustlers had driven about 10 head of cattle through the corral gate. One man was keeping the cattle moving while the other two fired at the barn, pinning down Iron Hawk and Swift Deer. None of them had noticed August's approach from behind. When August was within 50 yards of the rustlers, he took careful aim and fired. The shot hit one of the gunmen in the shoulder, causing him to drop his weapon with a cry of pain. The other rustlers wheeled around, searching for the source of the attack. Using the distraction, Iron Hawk and Swift Deer emerged from behind the barn, firing at the remaining rustlers. In the confusion, the cattle scattered, some running back toward the safety of the pasture. Grace saw one of the rustlers take aim at August, who was reloading his rifle. Without thinking, she urged her horse forward, emerging from the trees with her pistol raised. "Drop your weapon," she shouted. The rustler turned, startled by her sudden appearance, and hesitated just long enough for August to complete reloading and take aim. "Do as she says," August called, his voice cold with authority, "or the next shot won't be a warning." Caught between August's rifle and Iron Hawk and Swift Deer's approach from the other direction, the rustlers realized they were outmaneuvered. The injured man had already slumped in his saddle, and the one Grace had confronted slowly lowered his gun. Only the third rustler seemed determined to fight, wheeling his horse around to make an escape with the cattle he'd already separated. Swift Deer, showing remarkable horsemanship, galloped after him, cutting him off before he could reach the open range. Sheriff Miller arrived with 2 deputies just as the rustlers were being disarmed and tied. He surveyed the scene with a mixture of relief and admiration. "Looks like you folks handled things just fine without us," he commented, dismounting. "We heard the shots from the road and came as fast as we could." Grace, still shaking slightly from the confrontation, stayed close to August as they explained what had happened. The sheriff nodded approvingly when he heard how they had coordinated their response. "Quick thinking, using the creek approach," he said to August, "and mighty brave of you, Mrs. Patterson, to join the fight." "I didn't really think about it," Grace admitted. "I just saw him aiming at August and reacted." August's arm slipped around her waist, a public gesture of affection he hadn't previously allowed himself. "She saved my life, Sheriff. I was focused on reloading and never saw the second man take aim." The pride and tenderness in August's voice made Grace's heart swell. She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. As the sheriff and his deputies prepared to take the rustlers to town, Miller approached Grace and August once more. "These 3 match the description of the gang that's been hitting ranches all over the territory. With any luck, we've put an end to the trouble." "Let's hope so," August agreed. After the lawmen departed with their prisoners, Grace, August, and the Cheyenne family gathered to assess the damage. Remarkably, no one had been seriously injured, though a few bullets had splintered the barn door and one of the corral posts. "We were fortunate," Iron Hawk observed. "The spirits watched over us today." Grace nodded, still processing how quickly events had unfolded. "Thank you all for defending our home. I'm grateful beyond words." That evening, after the excitement had settled and repairs to the damaged structures had begun, Grace found herself once again on the porch with August. The events of the day had left them both exhausted, but also keenly aware of how precious their time together was. "I was so afraid when I saw that man aiming at you," Grace admitted, her hand finding August's in the gathering darkness. "I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." August drew her close, his arms encircling her protectively. "How do you think I felt when you rode out of those trees, drawing his attention to yourself?" His voice was rough with emotion, Grace, if anything had happened to you. Nothing did, she reminded him gently. We're both safe. August pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closed as though in prayer. When this is all over, when the rustlers are tried, and things settle down, I want to make things official between us, if you're willing. Grace's heart skipped a beat. What exactly are you proposing, August Blackwood? He smiled, recognizing her deliberate choice of words. I'm proposing that I court you properly, with the intention of asking for your hand when the time is right. I love you, Grace Patterson. I think I've loved you since the day I met you, though I didn't recognize it then. Joy spread through Grace's chest, warm and encompassing. I love you too, August. And yes, I would very much like you to court me, though I think we're well past the early stages already. August laughed softly. Perhaps we are, but I want to do this right, give you the respect you deserve. Grace reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. You've always respected me, August. It's one of the many reasons I love you. Their kiss was deeper this time, filled with the knowledge of shared feelings and future promises. When they finally parted, August kept her close in the circle of his arms, both of them content to watch the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The trial of the rustlers took place in Cheyenne 2 weeks later. Grace, August, Iron Hawk, and Swift Deer all traveled to the territorial capital to testify. The evidence against the three men was overwhelming, and they were sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison for theft, destruction of property, and the murder of the Simmons ranch hand. With the threat removed, life at the Patterson ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Iron Hawk and his family decided to remain camped on Grace's land through the winter, an arrangement that benefited everyone. The men worked together to prepare for the cold months ahead, while Grace and Morning Dove preserved food and made repairs to clothing and bedding. August officially moved out of the bunkhouse and into town, taking a room above the general store to maintain propriety during his courtship of Grace. He still spent his days at the ranch, working alongside Iron Hawk and Swift Deer, but his evenings were now devoted to proper courtship, dining with Grace in town, attending church together, and occasional social gatherings where they were increasingly recognized as a couple. The townsfolk who had once gossiped about the impropriety of Grace's situation now watched with approval as August conducted his courtship with respect and patience. Even Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Walters were won over by his obvious devotion and Grace's renewed happiness. "He's a fine man," Mrs. Henderson admitted to Grace after church one Sunday in October. "Anyone can see how much he cares for you." "Thank you," Grace replied, genuinely touched by the older woman's approval. "He is a fine man, and I'm very fortunate." As autumn progressed, and the first snow dusted the distant mountains, August broached a subject that had been on his mind. They were riding the property boundaries, checking that all was secure before winter set in fully. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch," he said, guiding his horse alongside hers. "The Jenkins property to the west is for sale. It would give us better access to water and another 100 acres of grazing land." Grace smiled at his unconscious use of us, and we, when discussing the ranch's future. "It's good land," she agreed. "But can we afford it?" August nodded. "I believe so. I've been saving most of my wages, and I have some money from when I sold my share of my mother's ranch in Montana. Between that and what the ranch has earned this year, we could make an offer." Grace reined her horse to a stop, turning to face him. "August, are you suggesting we buy the Jenkins property together?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'm suggesting that we build a future together, Grace. Starting with expanding the ranch that will support our family." "Our family," Grace repeated softly, her heart swelling with love and hope. "I like the sound of that." August reached across to take her hand. "So do I. In fact, I've been carrying something with me for weeks now, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it." Grace watched, breathless, as August opened the pouch and removed a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "August, I know it's not grand," he said, suddenly appearing uncertain. "If you'd prefer something more, it's beautiful," Grace interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." August's face relaxed into a smile. "Then, Grace Patterson, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you, support you, and stand beside you, not behind or in front of you, for all the days of my life." "Yes," Grace whispered, joy making her voice tremble. "Yes, August Blackwood, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as though made for her. Then, propriety forgotten, August leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her, a kiss filled with promises of their shared future. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small white church in town, with Iron Hawk's family and the community they had come to cherish as witnesses. Grace wore a simple gown of ivory silk, with sprigs of evergreen in her hair instead of a veil. August waited for her at the altar, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to radiant joy when he saw her walking toward him. Sheriff Miller gave the bride away, a role he accepted with misty-eyed pride. "Thomas would approve," he whispered to Grace as they reached the altar. "He'd want you to be happy." The service was brief but meaningful, with Grace and August exchanging vows they had written themselves. August's voice was steady and sure as he promised to cherish Grace for all his days, to support her dreams as fervently as his own, and to love her with every breath he took. Grace, tears glistening in her eyes, promised in return to stand beside him through whatever life brought them, to nurture the love between them, and to embrace each day as the precious gift it was. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, August kissed her with such tenderness that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes. Even Mrs. Henderson was seen to sniffle into her handkerchief. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the main house and a bonfire outside for Iron Hawk's family, who preferred to celebrate in their traditional way. Food and drink flowed freely, and music from fiddles and drums created a unique harmony that symbolized the blending of cultures and lives. Late that night, after the guests had departed and they were finally alone, August led Grace to the porch of what was now their shared home. Snow was falling gently, blanketing the land in pristine white, and the stars peeked through gaps in the clouds overhead. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" August asked, his arms encircling her from behind as they gazed out at their ranch. Grace leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "Happier than I ever thought possible again," she admitted. "When Thomas died, I felt like I couldn't breathe, like part of me had died with him. I never expected to find love again, especially not so soon." August pressed a kiss to her temple. "Life has a way of surprising us. When I rode into town that day looking for work, I had no idea I was riding toward my future." Grace turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining with love. "A wise woman once told me that life is short and love is important. I'm grateful every day that I listened to her." "So am I," August murmured, lowering his head to kiss her with a passion that promised a lifetime of love ahead. The following spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cattle delivered healthy calves, the fields yielded abundant hay, and Grace discovered she was expecting their first child. August received the news with joyful tears, kneeling before her to press a reverent kiss to her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our child." Grace ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "The first of many, I hope." August stood, gathering her in his arms. "As many as you want," he promised. "We'll fill this ranch with children and laughter and love." By autumn, their daughter was born, a strong, healthy girl with August's blue eyes and Grace's determined spirit. They named her Hope, a testament to the future they were building together and the unexpected joy they had found in each other. Iron Hawk and Mourning Dove became honorary grandparents to little Hope, while Swift Deer watched over her with the protective instincts of an uncle. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the extended family they had created, growing to include the Jenkins property and eventually expanding further as their success continued. 5 years after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching their children play, Hope, now joined by 3-year-old Thomas and infant James, Grace, reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if Sheriff Miller hadn't brought you to my door that day?" she asked, leaning against August's shoulder. August smiled, his arm tightening around her. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." Grace turned her face up to his, still moved by the love she saw in his eyes after all these years. "I used to think that losing Thomas was the end of my life," she admitted. "But it was really just the end of one chapter. You helped me turn the page, August. You taught me how to breathe again." August brushed his lips against hers, a tender gesture full of the deep love that had grown between them. "And you, Grace Blackwood, taught me what it means to love someone with every breath I take." As the Wyoming sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, August and Grace sat contentedly in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life neither had imagined possible before fate and courage brought them to each other's door.